everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I'm not recording this or writing about all things endurance, training, racing, and nutrition, I'm probably out there doing most things around endurance, racing, and nutrition.
And I'm Peter Glassford. I'm a registered kinesiologist and an endurance coach, and you are here on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk to people who do all sorts of different movements and people who coach and study and do all sorts of amazing things with movement, and we try and sort of pull that back out into things that we can use in our own pursuits and lives.
Speaking of our own pursuits, we're recording this pretty early because we have a very busy few days ahead of us.
Yeah, we'll see how we have an ambitious couple of days. We have provincial championships for mountain bike for me, and then we're going to roll right into a run around a short little loop up in northern Ontario.
Just a tiny little one.
Yeah. So we're going to try and do the Full Close Trail, which we speed hiked or hiked, depending on how you want to define that. There a couple years ago last year, and we did a couple podcasts about that, so you can look back at that if you want to learn more about that and hiking and outdoors and so forth. But yeah, we're going to run it, so that was sort of a pre-walk last year, and then this one we're just going to try and go quickly, which it'll take probably, we'll see, but it'll be the majority of the day.
So hopefully this is not our final transmission.
Right.
If people don't hear from us next week, though, possibly send help. Yeah,
I don't know what time of omens we want to invite with that, but
by the time this comes out, we'll hopefully be done. So
hopefully be done. Yes. But yeah, I guess by the time this one comes out, I thought you meant the future one that would alarm everyone.
Oh yeah,
right. No, so anyhow, this week we wanted to sort of put back out one of our past episodes, which you might not have heard because it was sort of in our first year or early in our podcast history, and just the way all the algorithms and statistics and things have changed in the Apple and podcasting world. It's a little harder to find. So we reference this one quite often, and I'm always referring to it with clients and different talks and stuff we do, so we thought we'd put this episode back out with Dean Golich, who's a professional coach, has been around for a long time. He was certainly one of my first role models in coaching. He was in, I think I tell the story in the podcast about sort of the trainer video that came with my first indoor trainer, and he was the one leading the workout and with all these like elite athletes in it, and I probably did that video like a million times. So
yeah, I think this is definitely one of my favorite episodes we've ever done with another coach, for sure. He's just so smart. We touch on so many different topics. So kind of no matter where you are in endurance sport, I think there's some helpful takeaway in here for you. I think what I've come back to, and we realized this one we recorded over 3 years ago because it coincided with, we recorded it like the day before our wedding, so it's very easy to remember how long ago it was.
Right.
So for 3 years, I've thought about this episode pretty constantly with just this one very simple throwaway kind of almost thing that he said about, weight loss. And I think a lot of people are wondering about weight loss as they head into the off season. And I'd say he probably had one of the most measured, smart approaches to how to look at that idea of, racing weight, or like if you should be trying to lose weight as an endurance athlete.
Right. Or power to weight is sort of the big thing, and everyone seems to go for the weight side of the equation, right? And that was sort of my question to him, especially because he's had a lot of success coaching females over the years, Katarina Nash and Rebecca Rusch as well.
Yeah, I mean, dozens of top-tier mountain bikers, road cyclists, cyclocross racers, Olympians, triathletes.
Yeah.
You
so I think I'll leave that for you to sort of find that in the episode, but I think that's one of the ones we refer to often as sort of that part of the podcast. And then also just from a consummate athlete perspective, we talk a little bit. He coaches different types of athletes. Certainly Rebecca Rusch, with all her crazy pursuits, is any different type of challenges and sort of skills and fitness is required. But he also does a bit with sort of motorsports, and we touch on that as well.
Yeah, so it's a great episode, and if you guys would be interested in having Dean come back on to talk, we'd love to be able to kind of urge him to come back for more. So hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, at Peter Glassford, at Molly J. Herford, or on the Consummate Athlete website page, consummateathlete.com, or the Facebook Consummate Athlete page. And just let us know if you have any other questions that you'd like him to dive into. And all right, let's get into it. Enjoy this episode with Dean Golich.
We're here today with Dean Golich from CTS Training Systems. Dean is the head physiologist, coaching lots of different athletes and some really high-end athletes. I always tell the story when talking about Dean, or something that I've heard Dean say, about sort of when I was getting started. I had a Cyclops trainer, and Dean was on the video with Roland Green and Allison Sider and all the Trek team at the time, and they're all on the screen, and Dean led everyone through this workout. It was like 5 by 2 minutes, and I remember I think I did that video for years, just like all through the winter. So big thanks to Dean for getting me through, and I'm excited to talk to him today about all his experiences.
So all of your athletes can blame him for
why the
brutal.
5 by 2 plays such a large role in my coaching is because of Dean. So
yeah, no one's ever positively talked about 5 by 2 on, 2 off.
Okay,
ever.
well I'm a little different. Most people will agree. So yeah, I love 5 by 2. So.
Yeah.
So Dean, welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I thought, to get started, could you just give us a bit of a rundown? I know there's lots of education behind you. Could you give us sort of a rundown of where you've come from as far as an education certification standpoint?
Yeah, so that's, now that I'm older, that's an interesting topic. I have an undergraduate degree in sports science. I guess it was physiology at the time. And then I went to graduate school, and I have one class, and I wrote the thesis and did it, but I never finished it. They offered me the job that I wanted, and so I just took the job and went on with it, and here I am 20 years later. So I was very lucky at the time. I was intern at the U.S. Cycling as a physiologist there, and then I got hired as a physiologist. And during that time, the school and the U.S. Olympic Training Center were in a cooperative with University of Colorado, and actually in Colorado Springs. And my professor was actually Ed Burke, who was kind of the hero of cycling at the time. And my undergraduate kind of professor and so on was Dr. David Martin, who led the Australian Institute of Sport in Cycling. So it was kind of interesting. I never got my master's degree, but I had all those people around me, and I worked with U.S. Swimming because they had all the blood testing. And then Jeff Broker, who's doing all the team pursuit stuff, was our biomechanist. And then Ed Burke and David Martin. So I was really, I thought everyone just had this kind of education and professors and everything else. And I didn't realize it till like 10 or 15 years later that people don't get that experience in college. So I was super lucky there.
Yeah, it's so funny because I was very lucky. I worked with a couple coaches coming up, and even the one main coach, Steve Neal, who I worked with, he worked with like Hunter Allen a little bit. And he was always looking for like opportunities to work with other people and talk to other people. And when people ask me about, like, I took kinesiology as an undergraduate, and I'm always like, you should probably just find people who are really smart and work with them doing what you want to do, and it should work out. But
it's really odd, because if I had to do it over again, I don't think I would do it any different unless I didn't have those people around. So I was super lucky that I could do blood testing on, say, USA Cycling junior camp or even a senior camp, and then I just took the blood right over to U.S. Swimming, and they had their own facility and the measurement devices for the blood, and I just went over there and did it myself. And I mean, now that just doesn't happen. So super lucky.
Because of like regulation and the trying to lock
and the
down
cost too.
Right.
U.S. Swimming doesn't even have that lab anymore. They farm it all out, so the same people aren't doing it. So yeah, like I said, it's not by design; it's by luck.
Yeah, the timing, right? That's what, the time, and when you come up through something, you can't necessarily repeat the same path.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting. That's awesome. And so when did you get involved with CTS? Was that sort of...
So let's see, man. So I was U.S. Cycling, and then I went out on my own for a while, and at the same time I was consulting with the GT mountain bike team at the time. And then I ended up managing the GT mountain bike team all the way through. That was started in '94, then through 2000. 2000 was the last year of GT mountain bike, and then that's when I joined Carmichael Training Systems at the end of 2000. Yep.
Okay. Well, so GT, I'm trying to remember who were the big riders on GT into.
So we had, Allison Dunlap.
Okay.
Yeah, and Steve Pede. I mean, we had riders from like 6 different countries. We had 6 riders on the downhill side and 5 to 7 at different times on the cross country side. And so the U.S. athlete was Allison Dunlap, and then we had a number of others. But I worked specifically with Allison, so over the years.
Right. Yeah. You coached Allison, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she was national champion. The big one that everyone talks about is always the one right around September 11th, right? She won in the U.S.
World champion.
World champion, right? Yeah.
Don't come on now.
Jeez.
Right.
There was a big difference between national.
100%. Well, but it was in the States, right? So that was like.
It was in Aspen, was the World Championship that year, and it was right after September 11th, and they were deciding whether to do it, because of honoring the victims of September 11th, but they ended up going forward, and she won the race, and she actually won the overall too of the whole World Cup.
Yeah, I was going to say that one day probably doesn't even do close to justice of her career and the accomplishments that you guys had with that. But
yeah, it's interesting. You always want that one day to prove you're the best in the world, and then there's the overall series championships, the national championships, and not to demean those by any means, but once you've won so many of them, then you want the world, and then you want the Olympic, and so on. But we had a great team. I think we won the overall team titles and downhill. It was a great time, and at that time, mountain biking was really popular. We had tons of support, great budget. It was, like everything, a little stressful, but it was good.
So you were doing a management role though there as well?
Yeah, I did management and coaching then. Yeah.
Wow.
So
what was that like, taking on the management role? Because given what you said, sort of was before that, very education based, very physiology sort of training based. What was that like? And how did you step
into it? It's born out of ignorance, right? So you're like, these people don't know what they're doing, so I'm going to do it. Well, then you realize they know a lot more than you think they did. And so it was more of me trying to control everything rather than actually wanting to manage. It's because then I'd like, why would we travel on this day if it's best for jet lag? Right. Or why would we do this? But then you start looking at budgets, money, and everything else, and then you start to realize that those people aren't quite as dumb as you thought they were. But that's why I went that direction. It was more out of a control issue. Now I'm trying to give up more control and let people do it rather than take more.
Yes, I think there's that period when you're learning and becoming wiser and older where you think that that's the way to go, and then eventually you get older and you just want to do the one thing or two things that you actually enjoy and are good at, I guess. But.
Correct. And so far now I've been really lucky to have about 20 years now of coaching and physiology, and people keep asking me how I have one good friend that's actually a director of performance at one of the national NGBs, and he's like, I don't know how you did it, and without trying to move up within the organization or some other entity. And I'm like, I know what I'm good at, and I want to stay at it. And then I read this paper just recently that's really important within the corporate world, that they keep promoting people right out of what they're good at. And I was like, see, I can't do that. So,
Yeah, it's funny. We always want that, like, more, right? And it's so hard to just, like, leave it at good enough.
Yeah,
or
correct.
Where it's right, anyway.
Yeah. Interesting. So speaking of good enough, you were just at the Olympics. So what I wanted to talk about there was there, it's very hectic for you. There's lots of athletes running around. Who were you down with? I guess let's get the context for why you were down.
Yeah, so I have 2 athletes, which was Mara Abbott for the USA on the road cycling side, and then I had Katarina Nash on the mountain bike side for the Czech Republic. So, yeah.
Wow. So now you were there then obviously for the mountain bike race, and that was Saturday for the women?
No, I left on the 15th, because I couldn't stay the whole month because obviously I had some work to do. And I was with Katarina for the last Olympic. Well, this is her number 5.
Yeah, geez.
So I was with her in London. And so then I was like, I've never been with Mara, and she's never made the Olympic team. So I said, okay, I'll go for her. And Katerina, you're on your own, other than normal communication, electronic communication. So, yeah.
Right. She's really nice. Yeah, I've met her a couple times at different races, and we actually got to ride in BC. When was that? Last fall. So.
Yeah, she's a good person. I try only to work with good people.
It's a good rule of thumb. Again, I think as you get older, you start realizing that it's not worth it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and so far I learned that lesson real early. Well, I didn't learn it. I just realized it early, and I've been really lucky that most of my athletes are good people too. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then while you were down there, was there anything that surprised you as far as like trends or things you saw people doing that seemed new or different or exciting?
Well, I think in the cycling world we're actually ahead of most other sports as far as the measurement, how diligent, controlling things. And what surprises me every time about either a world championship in different sports or an Olympics is how insecure and reactive they end up being the month, the week, or during the Olympics.
Yes.
And it's like all of a sudden, hey, we need to do this tomorrow, which is completely different than they've done their whole career. Mm-hmm. Or you should eat this today when you've never eaten it before. I sit back there. It was funny because the hotel we stayed at was right at the finish of the cycling race, road race, the triathlon. It was at the start of the open water swim. So anyways, I was sitting up there having breakfast, and one of the coaches from a different sport came up there with their athlete to watch one of the events starting from the female version or the female side of the sport, and was like, oh my gosh, we have to do this. We got to change this. We're going to do this different to his athlete. And it was a day before the Olympics. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, this is crazy. What are you doing? Yeah. And then he's like, I know you're sick, but we need to do this. We got to get a doctor, but this. And I was like, this whole thing is falling apart. You don't know what you're doing, which things we would never do in cycling, or I would never do personally. So it's a trend that occurs for the 20 years that I've been involved in it, and I never can get used to it. I just want to take the athletes aside and hug them and say, it's going to be all right. Just go race tomorrow. Do what you've always done, and it'll be fine. You should have thought about all this about 3 years ago.
Oh my gosh, they should hire you to just do that. Just walk around to all of the different hotels.
Just give be okay. Hugs from Dean. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a person with the U.S. Olympic Committee who's there, and they oversee a number of sports. And I said, we need to stop worrying about coaching the athletes, and we need to start coaching the coaches. Because and I understand where they're coming from. You get so insecure, and the moment starts to get so much bigger than it really is, because you feel like you're the center of the universe. And a lot of the athletes and coaches think they are anyways, me included sometimes. But
I was going to say, just with you leaving before Katerina's race, I mean, it sort of demonstrates that, right? Like, she's a professional and has raced many times, and she's got used to making decisions when she needs to. But, like, you being there isn't necessarily going to help that day. Yeah, right? It shouldn't, because you can't be there every day. So
yeah, if you were a good coach, you should teach the athlete how to teach themselves, because I guess that's the secondary or 1A and 1B. And 1B is that then the athlete is so dependent on you that they can't make a decision or an appropriate decision at the time when everything either goes to hell or is actually going right. They don't know what to do because of the dependency, and that's a bad trend. So, yeah, and that's a recipe for failure.
Can you think to the day-to-day, like, how do you prevent that athlete reliance, like,
What's interesting you talk about Katerina is that if you saw the text message, you'd be like, this guy's just like an idiot or a cheerleader. And I feel like that sometimes too, because I don't talk about going downhill anymore or how to take a turn or any of the stuff that we used to talk, what your tire pressure is or any of that. You kind of know it now after so long. And then once you get, I guess let's use tire pressure as an example. You get so bogged down in the minutia of it that pretty soon that's all they're thinking about, as opposed to like, hey, just relax. Everything's going to be fine. These are normal feelings that you're going to go through. This is how the nervousness at the start line will be. Everything's good. Have a good day. Let me know if you need anything. And it's so, after so long, it's more support rather than really coaching or technical aspects of it. You should have done your coaching from the very beginning. After 2 or 3 years, and most of the athletes that I've had go to the Olympics, I've been with them between 8 and 10 years. It only takes 2 or 3 years to kind of teach them all the technical stuff so that they can adapt and improvise. Then after that, it's more trying to refine things and be good at the right time. So, yeah.
And usually telling them to stop. Just stop riding for, a day. Take a break.
Yeah, it's very rare that I ever have to say do more. It's always do less. Yeah. Yes. And awesome. The summary to that is that what got you to the top, and I say this to the athletes all the time, what got you to the top is generally what keeps you from staying there. Because that obsessive, compulsive drive to succeed is, once you get up there, then you want to continue it, and it's never good enough. Where third used to be good, then second, then first, now you're first, now what? Well, now I need more first, and so pretty soon it gets into a revolving snowball rolling down, or, well, in this case, it's if it would roll uphill, and they just keep trying to push it, and then they want to do more and more, and then the results are, even when they get second, see, it's not good enough, where second used to be really positive experience.
Okay. Anything else at the Olympics? I know the cupping. Did you see anything with this cupping? Everyone seemed excited about cupping.
There's a Canadian guy that I kind of refer everything to, and he's about all the frauds and. Is it Tim Caulfield?
Oh yeah, Caulfield. Yeah.
If anyone, just follow that guy. There's a number of other resources that I go off of about homeopath. I got to be careful here. So,
I know where you're going. I'm on the same page, but for sure.
Substantiated trends or support, and this is what happens: is the insecurity ends up getting so high that there is a placebo effect with a lot of things, and if people think they're working, I mean, there's Dr. David Martin has done a lot of stuff that there's even when they measure some excitement in the brain or patterns in the brain, that if you go out on a date and you tell a girl that, hey, I just bought this $5,000 bottle of wine, it doesn't even matter if it's $100 bottle of wine. Already, I think it's the frontal cortex is excited in their brain just because they think a certain way. And so there is some points about placebo effects and positive talk, but I am completely the opposite side of these type of support trends or dietary strategies or cupping techniques, and unless I know they've been scientifically proven kind of time and time again, I'm pretty old school as far as what I do.
Yeah, it's the basics. Like, it always comes back, and everyone wants there to be something magical, right? But it's like, did you recover, for the last little bit? Like, you don't need cupping. Like, you just need to take a break. Like,
well, I think what's scariest about the cupping is, like, I read a lot of, like, women's health and, like, fashion and whatever kind of sites, and the most I saw about cupping was actually on those, where it was like, Olympians are doing it. Should you try it too?
Yeah, I'm telling you, if it's that Tim Caulfield has a great thing on it, and it's so bad because people are influenced by the Olympians, and they are influenced. But I'm telling you, cupping isn't why Michael Phelps won his 40th gold medal or 40th Olympic medal. And so you get sidetracked on those things, and it's the same with a diet trend or anything else. Is you get so focused on something that you actually can do rather than can you go up this hill hard enough, and do you have the talent to do it? And so far in my career, generally, I've found that people know what they need to do to succeed, and they're just not willing to do it.
Yeah.
It's kind of simple. You have to have the genetic ability, then you have to have the discipline, and then you have to have the will. But a lot of people don't have any combination of those things, and it's not negative, it's just then you start grasping at straws, and I've seen that they grasp at cupping, they grasp at all kinds of things, and it's a slow downhill trend for them, because then it goes to diet, or then it goes to whoever, and it could be a person as well. Like, this coach made this person successful, so I'm going to go to them. And that's the same thing as cupping, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough with that. So let's move on. You've coached a lot of female athletes. Would you agree that sort of a lot of your athletes would be more females?
Yeah, over the years, I guess as a whole, it's ended up being like that. Not by design. I don't know how I got into that. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I had this, this is a question that I think a lot of coaches can struggle with, and
coaches and athletes.
Coaches and athletes, but as far as the discussion of weight loss, body composition, power to weight, how do you handle that? I guess specifically with your female athletes, but it's also relevant to males for sure.
Yeah, I think obviously it's getting more and more. Whether debilitating is the word that comes to mind in the male side of things. I think we already knew the negative impacts in the female side of it. So I don't see anything positive in the power to weight ratio in the past with female side, and now I see it even being more negative in the male side of it. The way I deal with it is generally I don't deal with it. So I don't ever try to change the power to weight ratio overtly with weight, if that makes any sense. I try to keep on a balanced diet, which, it's so simple, and everyone's like, no, but I need something. No, we just kind of eat a balanced diet and move on. And then more power. I'm all about training and getting more power and maturing over time and trying to reinforce that and support the time and the development of the athlete rather than any short term. And the reason I say short term is that a lot of times, you can lose weight and you can gain power to weight, but then it comes with a whole different set of problems that hurt the long term development of the athlete. And I know that's what no one wants to hear this, and no one certainly at the elite level wants to hear it, but I just reinforce it every day. I don't engage in it. I don't it becomes very personal, and that's when you have to have a really good relationship with your athlete, and what may look on the outside at a certain way may not be as positive on the inside. So I try to correct some of that, and then if I need external help with too many weight issues, whether they're male or female, then I get external help. So,
I think that makes
and it's not nutritionist, but more like psychological or sports psych or real, like not even sports psychological, but real psychological.
Yeah. No, I mean, it makes sense. Like you're kind of playing the long game, right? Like a balanced diet and trying to up your power should put you at the proper weight for that power anyway, right?
Correct. And over time, you'll mature. It's just so hard that when athletes start, they're not mature in the sport. When you look at say you look at Kristen Armstrong and she's 43 years old and how many, miles she's put in. And then you look at some of the young athletes, they're just not developed yet. And it's hard the example I always use is if I said I want to be a doctor tomorrow, everyone would totally be accepting of me going 4 years of undergraduate and 4 years of, medical school and then, my residencies and everything. Everyone would be like, cool, that's the path you have to take, no problem, just work through it. But if I said, okay, it's going to be 8 years and we're going to have to work through it at this, everyone thinks you're crazy in sport. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that is. And in some things it's completely acceptable, and other things it's like, no, you have to do it tomorrow. So you have to make sure your weight is down to your exact weight within a pound of what you would win an Olympic medal at 8 years from now. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very hard to go and, you want to do, macros or whatever. And it's, often, just talking about grocery shopping and the tools to cook for yourself and stuff are probably more effective long-term solutions.
Correct.
Yeah. I just want to clarify. So do you personally look at power to weight, or do you try and focus mostly even just like?
Well, I only do that I look at it. I don't communicate that a lot of times with my athletes, but I look to where they are as a projection of maybe where they could be. But generally, I don't. that's maybe a once a month deal.
Yeah.
Most of the time I just look at, say, here's what your 3-minute power is this month or this day, and here's what it was the day before and the day before that, and I really look at just their powers, and I don't normally compare them. Some of the masters athletes and more of the citizens Gran Fondo athletes, I'll look at it because we can make some improvements, but that's generally we're doing it for health, not for performance. So the weight issue ends up being a health thing, not a performance.
And again, we're talking basics in that, they probably need to be a little more active off the bike, and they need to, eat well and sleep better, and,
And really those basic things, once we communicate it to them and you see a positive effect in the weight, the whole family is happy, the person's happy, and they needed the weight loss anyways, but it's more from activity, like you say. And better choices, but these choices are general. They're not... I believe that everyone knows what to do, mostly in life. It's just whether we choose to do it or not.
Totally. I just wrote a nutrition book that was pretty much 250 pages of what healthy foods are. Come on.
Yep. It's true. And everyone knows what hard work is.
Yep.
Now do we choose to do it? So.
Awesome. So moving on, maybe related, but in terms of athletes you've worked with for those 10 years and even longer, have you seen any trends in terms of the ones that last longer in a sport, without getting, chronic injury or burning out mentally or physically?
I think the ones that have, I guess the word that comes to mind is resilience. I think if you're trying to push yourself and do things, you're going to have an injury and you're going to have stresses and you're going to break down. And I don't think that that's negative. I think that a lot of, there's a quote, I can't remember who it's from, but it basically says that why do we worry about being happy all the time when it's all the stresses and negativity many times in our life that shape us? And so we look at it as like we're supposed to have a perfect diet, perfect training, perfect this, and then that's going to get you this perfect result. When in reality, you have to push your body, you have to push your mind. And so, for example, supplements, or we try to utilize external sources that actually will hurt the adaptation of what we're trying to gain physiologically. So I'll use antioxidants as an example. So a lot of times when you go through a lot of oxidative stress, then your body compensates, you adapt, and you move on. But if you supplement it, then actually you don't get the stress to your body, which would lead to the adaptation, which was the whole goal to begin with. So we need the stress mentally and physically to adapt. Just as you can train your stomach to kind of absorb a little bit more carbohydrate, you train your mind to deal with a little bit more stress and discomfort riding, and then actually your body adapts as well physiologically. So I think that that's all necessary, and I don't know why we think of it so negatively.
Okay, I think that's good.
I think that's good.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I mean, again, it sounds basic, but it's I guess
when you do a communication or podcast like this, people walk away and go, "Man, I didn't learn anything."
Oh,
I don't think so.
I don't have hardly anything to offer other than there's no crazy trends, there's no crazy training, there's no crazy diet, there's nothing. All the minutia that I've seen over all the years, it's kind of like common hillbilly sense to a point. Yeah, so my coaching philosophy, as far as the philosophy, hasn't changed much at all. Maybe some of the techniques or how we measure it physiologically or some of the tools we've used to create more accuracy may have. But mostly that's come from my parents of how to hold myself and the athlete accountable, how to be a good person, how to do the right thing whenever there's like really a high level of stress. That's where it's come from. So it's in one hand it was really hard, and in the other hand it's really easy because it's who you are. So people ask me, do I train women differently than men? And I don't. And I've never treated any of the women as like, oh, you're a woman, so you got to do this or you got to do that. Or I just treat them the way my parents would have expected me to be through all my sporting career and life. And so that's the way I do it. And none of it's by design. It's just who I am. So, yeah.
Okay. As far as, I mean, I think similar related topic as far as resiliency and stuff. You have athletes who, I'm thinking Rebecca Rush, I guess, as far as leading it, but is it Rush or Roosh? I just pronounced it horribly.
Rush. Yeah.
You were
Okay.
good.
I overthought it again.
Oh, jeez.
Anyhow, as far as athletes switching sports and continuing to be successful, she comes to mind as someone you've worked with and has done that. So when you have someone who's going to change sports or start taking on another sport, how do you look at that as a coach, and how do you support that?
Well, there's one thing with the first sport. A lot of times, if it was, I would want them to have gone through the first sport to kind of an ultimate conclusion, which is like either complete failure or success, but they really tried, as opposed to get to where it just gets really hard, and then they just wanted to switch because they didn't want to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. That's rough for me. I'd rather someone go through it, kind of fail, and then you switch. That's fine. But I feel like you have to kind of go to the ultimate conclusion to get through that rough patch to understand that it's going to be the same, whether, again, in our example, whether it's medical school or business or another sport, you're going to get to the same spot. And it does, and that's why that burnout, overtraining, whatever, that's what I meant before, where people find out what they have to do to succeed and they're just not willing to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And so that's one side of it. And then, like, Katarina Nash went to 2 Olympics as skiing, cross-country skiing, and then she went to 3 as in mountain biking. So obviously, if you have the talent and the discipline, you can do it. And I think switching sports is not that big a deal, as long as well, you have to have some of the ability, and then you can't switch from sprinting to endurance sports, but yeah.
Okay.
Is that, are we making sense there?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think that's important too, because I mean, that relates to resiliency, right? Like, because if you're not going to push yourself, then you're not going to do it again. You're not going to learn anything, even just for life, right?
Well, yeah, I think that one thing that, if I could tell everyone, including the athletes, and have them actually hear and listen, is that everyone goes through all the same things you're going through. They just kind of keep going. Mm-hmm. And not so hard on themselves to the point of it's debilitating. So, or they don't take it to extreme. So, for example, you can get failure, but that doesn't mean, okay, now I've got to lose more weight to have my power to weight ratio, and then you go down another negative road. And then you get an injury, and then you need to come back faster from the injury, so now you get a secondary injury. It's all those kind of things that going, okay, I got injured. This is normal. I got to rehab this. I've got to take my normal path, get back into it. Everyone gets very insecure, coaches most importantly, so they don't argue or protect the athlete and keep them secure and saying, stop. You got to stop training. We've got to, even if a big event is coming, knowing that, yeah, you'll be fine, and this isn't going to define you, and all of those buzzwords that we use. You just got to be disciplined and resilient and keep going and don't quit.
Awesome. Yeah. That's good. Speaking to Rebecca's other challenges she's taken on, can you sort of lead us through what she did that was last fall, I believe, or last winter?
The Kilimanjaro?
Yeah. So as far as because she would have had to have skills and stuff that she had to learn, right?
Well, Rebecca's she's the term, if her name could be resilience, but she's done a number of different things. So whatever she embarks on, it's generally an endurance of will type of event. And so she understands all that, but she does a lot of due diligence before. And my portion of that was in the altitude training side of it. So she decided to hike and ride up a Mount Kilimanjaro to whatever it is, 19,000 feet. So a portion of it was carrying her bike, a portion was riding up it, and then riding back down it. And my portion was the altitude side. So what we did was we have the U.S. Olympic Training Center here that has a high altitude training room, and you can change heat, humidity, altitude, and so on. So we came in here and tried to measure what her speeds were, what her oxygen saturation was, and some different things. So basically, we put her on a treadmill at 10% grade at various altitudes from 9,000 feet to 17,000 feet with a 40-pound weight vest, and just had her hike and try to get some numbers to know what her pacing should be, how long, what it could be as far as distance a day, and different sections of altitude, because obviously you're climbing a mountain. So we tried to go from 19 to 13, and then we came back the next day and did roughly 10 to 15. Then the next day we started at 12 and went up to 17, and just to see, so she had a feeling of how difficult it would be and what the pacing side of it. So that was a pure physiological side of it. And
Awesome.
That's the side that I worked with on her. And then she did all the logistics and what she was going to, and she knows how to ride a mountain bike, obviously, so that's not a problem. But it's real, you start to kind of doubt yourself. So at 17,000 feet plus of what you can do and how you feel and what your pacing is. So that's really what we worked on.
Okay. Now, how, as far as pacing, how did she pace the effort in the actual, challenge? How did she pace it?
Yeah. So in the room, what we did was we ended up looking at the saturation, and when we were at very high altitude, she would get to like 80, 78 was kind of the lowest, and maybe just a tick lower, of 78% of the O2 saturation. And so I could see it was very interesting, because we do all this physiological measurement of a lot of things, or a lot of physiological variables. And I could see from the outside, her face would just start to go a little bit pale whenever she went about 18, and she would start to kind of ventilate a little odd, and she would just not feel queasy and not right. And so we did that like 3 times within the room to try to get her to feel it. And then that's kind of how she did it. So we did have some heart rate stuff, but you can't, when environmental conditions change and are variable, and fatigue, it's hard to use physiological variables to measure that fatigue. So I feel like our biggest benefit was getting her to feel the sense when she was pacing a little bit too much, or when she needed to get over an incline or some of the rock scree sections of how hard it was going to be, to kind of pace herself at different times. And then other times when maybe it was a little easier, she could pick up the pace a bit. So it's about develop and feel, which is kind of an odd thing to say in a physiological sense.
It is, but it's funny. Like, you see that supported so many times, that like that perceived exertion is valuable. And so, I coach a lot of athletes towards Leadville, which is at altitude as well. And so everyone wants the wattage and the heart rate number that's going to magically get them to the top. And, I do a very similar thing. We can use heart rate and watts, and, but you got to go out and experience, as best you can, ideally at altitude, but not everyone has that. But, knowing what it's like when you're sort of dipping over, right? And you're going to, there's only a so long.
We don't use watts a lot of times is that you never know what the environmental conditions on the day are. And I've done a lot of testing. So, for example, in theory, you're peaked and tapered. So does that mean you get 5 watts more on average? Is that 5 watts for 4 hours? Is that 5 watts for 9 hours? Mm-hmm. And so then you're starting to, you have a lot of variability in how you're prescribing that. And then on the day, we'll say it's 70 degrees. Then on the day, it's 100 degrees. Mm-hmm. So then that changes. Well, now it was plus 5 watts, but now since it's 100 degrees, it's minus 2 because it was plus 5, but now we're minus 8. And that means you did all the testing. But does that mean you did the testing for 9 hours of the complete Leadville if your goal was 9 hours? Does it mean... Yeah, so it just gets I feel like we get so sidetracked on it. The idea of the power and the training is to get you to be the strongest you can be on the day, but you still have to have the feel, because I find that coaches a lot of times are holding athletes back when they could have gone faster for the feel. Now, I do believe that some of the wattage for early pacing of ultra endurance and even some time trials is okay, but past that, you should have taught them the feel of pacing rather than the wattage and the big goal of it. So that's my speech on that.
For sure. And I will link to, there's a video that you did for Training Peaks about altitude, so I'll link to that as well. Because I'm sure you talk about a lot of sort of this idea of performance at altitude in that.
Well, that the idea with that talk too is that once you have enough power data and you have some of our elevation corrected WKO4 graphs, you can find out what it is individually. Because again, when we talk about altitude, have you lived at sea level? How acclimatized are you? Who are you? So we can correct that after the fact. Normally, that's a historical view to say when you did this power, roughly that was related to this sea level power for you. Not for me, not for someone else, but it's specific for you. And I think that's the role that can really play as a specificity for the person. Awesome. Not for a general trend in altitude.
So if you were going to give us your basics, advice for someone who is going to altitude, but is a sea level, dweller, what would that be as far as how you could best prepare? I get that question a lot.
Okay, so the number one thing is that if you can't afford or you don't have the ability for tents or pre-acclimatization, you just show up the night before and race. And the important thing is just to work on your pacing. I find that a lot of times the sea level athletes can be fairly successful or at least get their best out of it, but it's their pacing that holds them back. So a lot of times they'll go out thinking, oh, well, it's really not that hard, but it catches up with them. And a lot of times the acclimatized athletes just go slower. They don't go harder. And they're not acclimatized that they actually go harder. They just know how to pace themselves at the beginning of the effort. So that's the first thing. Sure. If you can acclimatize, I do think you need about 14 days to kind of get over that initial hump of trying to get. Now for Leadville, since we were talking about that, I'm not a big fan of going up to 10,000 feet for 14 days before the race, but I would say that if you can get to a 7,000 foot or a 6,000 foot, adaptation cycle, that might be pretty good. The take-home message is if you can acclimatize for 14 days, good. If not, just focus on being as strong as you can, show up the night before, and then go race.
Right.
I like that.
Awesome. So let's talk here, again, we're looking at all sorts of different sports and trying different sports. So I have sort of two things I wanted to get knocked off here. So let's talk, you also coach outside of cycling. You coach some motocross, supercross guys, and then also some NASCAR, like car racing. So how for that, I would imagine you're doing a lot of physiology type work for those folks as well?
Yeah, so I guess the key principle in training is specificity. So if you want to be fast riding a bike, you got to ride a bike, or you want to be a fast runner, you got to run. So it's the same with motocross. If you want to be fast riding a motorcycle, you got to ride a motorcycle a lot. What we do is try to interject a lot of the training principles that maybe they would just go ride the motorcycle every day and not know when to go. They just do, similar to cycling and a lot of our age-graded sports, they just kind of go out and ride medium hard every day. So we've just tried to manipulate the intensities and the durations of the actual motocross effort, and then how we supplement other training to benefit that. I would say that just differing the time frames of the actual intervals and efforts in motocross is the majority of it. The supplementation or cross training or some of the other things that you might do is a minor part. And then we have a big problem with dealing with kind of heat and hydration, because they have in the outdoor season 2 30-minute motos, and it could be in 100 degrees. So it's more about habits of hydration and adaptation to heat that maybe you would use in a triathlon or things like that. So we try to use some of the physiological principles of that to adapt it. And then NASCAR it's an interesting thing. The way I relate that, it's the same thing with the heat, is that it's basically like being in a sauna because they have a fireproof underwear, fireproof suit, and helmet. And the exhaust of the car, the actual tubing exhaust, runs right under their feet to the point that they have to have heat shields on the heels of their shoes to limit their heels from getting burned. So say the track temperature is 120, the actual asphalt. In the car, it can be 130 plus at their feet to 100 plus, at their head. So we always... It's not that hard. Like the drivers themselves, they tell me this. This is not my own experience, but they're like, Dean, it's not that hard to drive the car. It's just hard to keep your concentration over 4 hours. So it's like being in a sauna and you're just putting a nut on a bolt over and over and over again for 4 hours and then just never dropping it or never not getting the threads right or something like that. It's more of a concentration thing that pretty soon it's back to that will thing. You just kind of lose interest and you don't want to do it because you're just hot and uncomfortable.
So as far as the heat training for them, they would be using saunas then in addition to actual car driving?
We do some supplemental training, or we just go out and ride our bicycle in the heat of the day and do things like that too. So they're used to just a long aerobic effort in the heat. So, yeah.
Have you, I'm sure you have, followed a lot of the stuff right now with heat and sort of using heat as a altitude adaptation technique?
Yeah, there's basically 2 papers out there, and I'll try to send them to you afterwards, and maybe you can link them. And one is a reference that combining heat and altitude has a performance increase, and then another exact same paper or similar says combining heat and altitude or adding the heat doesn't help performance. So right now it looks like there's some help if it was more of a hot environment at altitude, but a little bit more of a gray area, maybe that if you just did heat training, have kind of similar effects in a non-heat related performance or competition, I should say. So I don't think you can't go wrong with heat training because you're it on your aerobic days anyway, so it doesn't matter, and it doesn't take long to get an adaptation to, say, the plasma volume. I think we're 10 to 14 days.
Yes.
So, and if you did it on the aerobic days, it doesn't hurt you. It's when you try to do it all the time, or you try to do it within the intensity days, is where you could run into problems. You can also supplement it with saunas and hot baths and different things like that. But when we start talking about those kind of things, those are 1%ers, and generally you can screw it up 10% for a 1% gain. So, but yes, I'll try to send those papers so people can refer to.
That'd be awesome. So next one, I'm just trying to knock some off here. We had a couple questions about TRIMPs. Are you familiar with TRIMPs?
Yeah, the training impulse score, yeah.
Yeah. Do you see people using that very much anymore? Like in my world, TSS has sort of taken over a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the old Bannister model, and I shouldn't say old as in bad. It's just they had limited measurement, and so TSS is measured off of a non-physiological variable of power. Mm-hmm. So, and then the idea is that you have an average power or a normalized power, which is a little bit different, and you know how that relates to your threshold. So we would call that an intensity factor, and then you add time to that, and that gives you TSS. The example, if people are unfamiliar, is that you can do 4 hours easy, or you can do 1 hour at your threshold, and those both have a similar amount of stress or training stress score to them, depending on how hard you go. And prior to this, we could only say, well, you could guesstimate in your mind that, oh, I did a 30-minute power very hard, and then I did a 4-hour ride very easy, but you wouldn't know how to relate those two. You would just say, oh, the 30-minute power really hard was much more stressful towards the training load. But now we're trying to accumulate all the variability within the intensity, a ride, a race, to put a training stress score to it. And that's, again, historically. So you're looking for a TSS by day over time of 40, say, I think the default in most of the WKO4 programs is 42 days for a chronic training load and 7 days for an acute training load. So then the idea is that you take those loads and see where you produced your best, say after the loads or during the loads, or what the demands of the racing was. So that's the idea.
Awesome. So I will link to some TSS stuff as well from the Training Peaks website.
I have to add, this makes me, I keep saying I'm going to make up acronyms and just start dropping them into training conversations, and TRIMPS really feels like one that I would have made up.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, in your opinion, people are generally better using TSS, especially as cyclists, but would you say for a multi-sport athlete, like, would TRIMPS ever come into play anymore?
Well, I think that for a multi-sport athlete, it's probably more accurate because you're getting a historical load. Because I feel like multi-sport athletes that end up getting into that kind of gray area of doing everything medium, and so you need some type of total volume load based number or kind of in trend or indication. It doesn't have to be like 101 versus 99. It has to be like your trend when you've gotten an injury was to accumulate so much load, or your trend when you've always performed best was you had this much load. So I would say that's what I think it's much more useful for that. If I looked at a TSS for a Tour de France athlete, you'd be like, holy crap, we're really never going to train like that. But maybe we should at different times, or maybe we can section it off. There's some things to be learned from that.
I think the last question to finish on that was a sciencey one, but again, we had a couple questions about it, so hopefully folks are interested. And again, TSS is something that, that's getting easier and easier to use and access, so I think a lot of people can start accessing that ability to sort of keep track of, like you say, their load. So sort of like the weights they're using in the weight room, rather than just counting how many reps you do, you actually can see, how that correlate or how that combines with the actual weight that you're lifting, but in a, again, in a cycling or a running sort of application.
Yeah, you're trying to relate that, hey, here's my 1 rep max, and here's how close to that I work, and then how many reps do I do, and how much time during the workout and throughout the week and throughout the month do I do that, and have I improved? And then where did I break down, and what were my performance? I mean, there's that Dr. Andrew Coggin who kind of puts it a lot of time, once we go through all that, is that the best predictor of performance is performance itself. And to relate it back to that elevation corrected power is you're trying to figure it out for you individually. And I think that's where a lot of the TSS and some of the chronic training loads help, because you really figure it out for you that you can handle this much workload with your work schedule and how much you ride, and if it was mountain bike or road or multi-sport or climbing or whatever it is, you're trying to figure it out for you, not just because arbitrarily it says 100 TSS was a really hard day. So
yeah.
And that just reminded me of a fault. So they are doing heart rate TSS and pace TSS.
Yep.
Do you feel like that, as long as the data is consistent, and like, is that still a valid way to contribute to that chart?
Yeah, it's better than, well, let's put it this way. RPE is still a great, help, your rated perceived exertion. So that is always positive. Whenever you can put some stress from heart rate and RPE, you're trying to get, whenever you have multiple variables, if the data in is bad, the data out's going to be bad. So that's off the top. But if you can put some variables together, you may get a trend. And that goes with that rated perceived exertion, like how hard was today and how tired do I feel. That's important. But one caveat to that is that being tired is good sometimes. Being chronically tired and chronically doing medium work is not good. So you need to put yourself into some fatigue, but you need to rest. Like we talked about before, most people just don't rest enough. It's not the training that they're kind of afraid to do. Yeah, sometimes they're afraid to do really hard training, but they're much more likely not to rest enough. So that, I think, is the key. So if you can put the heart rate and the pace into the TSS, I think that's positive.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Consummate Athlete podcast. You can check out my stuff over at theoutdooredit.com or by following me on Instagram and Twitter at Molly J. Herford. And you can check out Peter's coaching, training plans, blogs, all that fun stuff over at smartathlete.ca or by following him on Twitter and Instagram at Peter Glassford. And if you want to support this show and other awesome podcasts, please check out wideanglepodium.com for show info, other podcasts, bonus content, and to become a donating member so you can get all of that rad behind the scenes content and help keep shows like this on the air. And lastly, if you're enjoying this podcast and all the information that we're bringing to you every single week, do us a solid and pop into iTunes to leave us a rating and review. It takes you about 2 seconds. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on your phone, and it really helps us out. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.